about to deal with the concept and the history of Troy. As we said, Troy was the centre, and from the Iliad, from Homer's work, we understand that Troy was destroyed in a 10-year war with the Greeks. And Homer, writing later, describes the Trojan system, what happened at Troy in the war. And it's important to understand in dealing with the significance of Troy. The Walusian kingdom under Priam was centred on Troy. Troy was its capital. And the Hittite system came from all areas of the Middle East, Hittite areas of the Celts, down to defend Priam's Troy against the invasion by the Greeks. Now they were in the end betrayed and were unsuccessful through their own idolatrous stupidity, and Troy fell. Troy fell, and it was Troy 7 that fell, and they fell when Eli was judge in Israel, and that was about 1054 BCE. They went out in 3 parties. There was Briothus and what became the Dumnonians left and went through North Africa, that is escaping in the trade routes to North Africa, and they visited the next group who were under Aeneas. And Aeneas escaped and went through to Latium. Rome didn't exist when in 1054 BCE, and it was the legendary sons of Aeneas, Romulus and Remus, that established Rome, and Romulus then killed Remus and established the Roman system. Now, Briothus visited Aeneas's groups in Latium, but then went on to Spain, and from Spain they went into Britain. And they established the British people. There was a Margagite tribe there in Britain when they arrived, and they subjugated them and moved them into the north. They became the Picts. The British people were in fact Trojans, and they left their history there. It's been messed up by British Israelites who've rather suppressed the actual history of the original British, who were a combination of Trojan Celts who came in and established Britain, and in Cornwall and Devon the Dumnonian groups of the Trojans settled, and they continued on during that period until the arrival of the Parthian horde into northwestern Europe. Now, because of the influence of the Romans and the history of the Romans and the British, Troy was a major element, and they decided they'd re-establish Troy, and so also the Franks, the Raphathian and Salian Franks, who had moved to the north from the fall of Troy, they actually came into Western Europe later as the Raphathian and Salian Franks. They trace their ancestry back to about 500 odd year BC, and their first king that they have record of is Antenor I. He was one of the descendant lines of Antenor and Priam from the fall of Troy. They reinvaded the area and established Galatia in Troy. In a similar way, France was originally called Gaul by these same Celts in their move. Now, so that established the desire in the mind of Constantine to establish Troy. It had malarial problems, so Constantine established Istanbul, or Constantinople, to the north on the Dardanelles, rather than establish a city in Troy as an area which was infested with malarial mosquito problems. So that then was the reason for the establishment and the Roman occupation of the Middle East, including Troy and Constantinople. The main capitals was established in Constantinople instead of Troy, but the Trojan system was recorded by Nennius and Geoffrey of Monmouth in Britain, explaining how these Trojans became the British people. Now, in Britain there was also the Tuatha De Danann, who were the haplogroup I Isles group, who came into Britain also and into Ireland, and they were established through into Denmark. Now, that group is also recorded by the Irish, who, it must be remembered, the King of Ireland, who was Neil of the Nine Hostages in the 4th century, his mother was British also, and she was a British princess, and that line back through to the Trojans is part of the Irish history also. 5% of all Irishmen are descended from Neil of the Nine Hostages, and therefore from the British royal lineage of the Trojans. All of that is important and factors into the reason that Troy was of importance to Britain and still is, and also to the Romans and their system. All of that is important.
We're standing on the Turkish heavy battery site on the Dardanelles at Dardanos, looking across at the Gallipoli Peninsula. This area of the Dardanelles is very important for a number of reasons. The name Dardanelles carries with it connotations of the crossing of Dan. Now, we don't know who these people are. The Turks themselves are unsure of the origin of the name. The indigenous people here before the arrival of the Guz had this name, and it's carried from antiquity. Just who were the people who crossed here at the Dardanelles? And we're looking here now at the narrowest point of the Dardanelles, which you can see standing in Asia. We're looking across the Dardanelles, which divides Europe and Asia, and we're looking at the European side. It's only a very short distance over very calm water. What questions that arise in our mind in dealing with the Dardanelles are who these tribes were, why this area was so important, even as late as the Gallipoli campaign here in the First World War of the 20th century. What was the real purpose in the establishment of this area as part of the Eastern Roman Empire? The questions that arise in our minds are, why would the Dux Britannicum, Constantine, crowned as emperor or proclaimed as emperor in the city of York in what is now England in 309, come here? Why would he come across the Roman Empire to establish a new city at Constantinople? What happened in the previous centuries? What happened in 259 to make the Goths invade Nicaea? Why was it such a disaster? Why would the smashing of the idols of Rome in Nicaea, named after a Greek princess, be such a tragedy to these people? Why would the Goths smash the idols in the first place? What tribes were involved in the move? Who moved across the Dardanelles? What nations? Where did the Parthian horde go after its defeat by the Persians following on its victory over the Romans in the 2nd century? Precipitate. Where did they go? Were the Goths part of them? Did they go to Nicaea? Did they cross here? Was it just the people of Dan, as Dardanelles would appear to proclaim? Who crossed here? Did anyone go up around the Black Sea? Why did they go into Europe? What happened with the Romans and the Germans when they did go into Europe? All these questions we can answer by looking back in history, not just at the 2nd century AD, but going back 1500 years before that to Troy. When we look at who the Trojans were, what was the importance of the Greco-Trojan War? Why did the Greeks take on the Trojans, and what was happening in Troy? Why was Troy so important? Where did the Trojan people go? What parts of the world did they colonize? What's important about Troy? What's important about this part of the world, about Anatolia? What could have happened in relation to the north and the Black Sea and the southern Russian steppes? Were the Russians there? What happened at the time of the Exodus? When did it take place? And who was involved? Were the Trojans anything to do with the tribes that moved out of Egypt? What happened to get the Israelite peoples and the other peoples associated with them into Egypt and then back out again? All these questions are very important topics in history, and they occupy major parts of our cultural heritage and literature. The answers are surprising, and the answers will give us direction as to perhaps what is happening in the future, not just what has happened in the past. Let's turn now to Troy, and let's look at what the Trojan War was, and let's look at where the people went, who they are, and who they are today. Let's answer questions on who the Celts are, who the Anglo-Saxons are, who the Northern Germans are, and the Frisians in Northern Netherlands. What did they come from? Who were the Parthian horde? Where did the Lombards come from? Who were the Vandals, and why were they called Vandals? Where does vandalism come from? Who were the Goths, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, and what other tribes went with them into Europe, the Suevi and the Heruli? What is the importance, and what does it matter? Why is it important today? Where do these tribes come from? How many questions can we answer? And what questions does that pose for the development of mankind and modern theories of science? How does the theory of evolution fare when you're moving tribes all over the world? What is the furthest point east the Scots went to? How does that fare with the theory of evolution? The answers are surprising. Let's start now with Troy, and we'll go there and answer some questions and pose perhaps 1,000 others. We're here at the ancient city of Troy. We're speaking with Mustafa Ashkin, who is a guide. He's been a tour guide since 1978. He went to England to study English, and now guides in multiple languages, including German and Swedish, Mustafa, I think. He's the author of the book on Troy and also on Gallipoli, A Turning Point. Now we're going to ask Mustafa to give us a background on the history of Troy. Then we'll have some questions and discussions about the Trojans and where they may have gone and the legends associated with them. And then we'll look at the area in general, and then I'll pose some serious questions that we will look at in historical perspective in other areas. Thank you, Mustafa. Well, it's nice to see you.
Well, Troy is a famous legendary place, and everybody visits the site because of the legend. If I shortly remind the legend, Paris, son of Priam was king of Troy during the time of the Trojan War, kidnapped the beautiful Helen from Sparta. Helen was married with Menelaus, king of Sparta. So Paris kidnapped her. Then her husband Menelaus followed her with a big army. Ajax, Patroclus, Achilles, Nestor, Odysseus, all those important kings of the Greek world came to Troy. They surrounded Troy and they fought here for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, they realized that they wouldn't be able to conquer the city by normal way. They decided to make a trick. Odysseus came with the idea of building a wooden horse. The carpenters built a wooden horse and put selected soldiers in it. And the Trojans took the horse inside, although somebody warned them. I mean, Trojan priest Laocoon said, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. And still, despite this warning, they took the horse inside of the citadel. And in the night, the soldiers came out of the horse and killed the guards and opened the gates wide. And the army marched into the city very quietly, and they started fires on several parts of the city. Until morning, everybody was killed. Aeneas was able to escape from Troy, and after long adventures, he went to Italy. In Italy, he founded a new kingdom. But the real founders of Rome, Remus and Romulus, were coming from Aeneas' family, or they were descendants of Aeneas' family. That's why Romans accepted Aeneas as real founder of Rome, and they accepted Troy as mother city of Rome. So that means there is a direct connection in between the legend of Troy and legend of Rome. After the sack of Troy, the Trojans' tragic end became the subject of many epic poems. Those epics came from generation to generation, from ear to ear as oral sagas. 500 years later than the Trojan War, Homer put the epics together, wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, people from all over the world visit Troy because of that legend. But after archaeological excavations, archaeologists discovered 9 cities were one on top of each other. And the earliest one goes back till 3000 BC, and the last one ends in 500 AD. So which means for 3,500 years, many different people lived here and created different civilizations. This is why Troy is an important archaeological site as well. But which city was the city of Priam? Which city was that legendary one mentioned in the Iliad? Let's discuss that later. As I said, there were 9 cities here, so that shows 9 different layers, were a bit one on top of each other. But from those 9 different cities, of course, the city of Priam, important for us. Some archaeologists say 6 was the city of Priam, or you may call it Homeric Troy. Others say 7a, the first phase of Troy 7. Actually, that doesn't make much difference. I mean, one could accept both of them as one city, as the city of Priam, because they were the same people, they followed the same culture, and they used the same city walls. There were some differences, like 6 had a well plan with freestanding houses, streets, and so on. But 7 did not have a city plan. They built many small houses everywhere inside of the city walls. Why so many small houses were built inside of the city walls? We explained that with a war. because normally people lived outside of the city walls. The war started and they had to come inside. That's why, without paying attention to build well constructions, just to keep more people inside, they built many houses everywhere. Also, during the excavations, archaeologists found arrowheads, spear points, human skeletons. These are all evidences for war. Because of this, American Cincinnati University accepted Troy 7A as the city of Priam. But there are still some archaeologists insisted on Troy 6. They say it fits better with the descriptions in the Iliad. The Greeks, they say, tried to conquer this well-fortified citadel for many years. They couldn't conquer, and then an earthquake destroyed the walls. Then the Greeks reached their goal. They thought Poseidon met the earthquake, destroyed the walls, helped the Greeks. To thank Poseidon, later they built a wooden horse, because one of the symbols for Poseidon was a horse. So that's another theory about the wooden horse. The small houses I mentioned before, houses of Troy 7A, almost all of them had such big jars buried beneath the floors of the houses for storage reasons, for liquids as well as grains. And by covering them with flat stones, they also lived in the same room. Actually, one of them was found recently. It was sealed. When the archaeologists opened that, it was completely empty. That means they stored either wine or olive oil and it evaporated. And these are the primitive grinders here, but the pipeline is from Roman time actually. Although Trojans never seriously had a water problem, they always wanted to have more water, and they transported water by such terracotta pipelines from the mountainside. There are aqueducts about 14 kilometers far from here. So Troy 9 had running water, and it was a very large settlement. Those walls you're looking at from Troy 6 and 7, but they're certainly from the time of Priam. Famous Trojan War, which is accepted today as an historical fact, took place outside of those walls here. The tower here was built later on as a further protection for the East Gate. And they're from 15th century BC, means 3,500 years old. But why so well preserved? Because in the Roman Empire time, Romans wanted to build a temple of Athena. Romans always built big constructions to show the strength of the Roman Empire, and there wasn't enough space here. What they did, they built those parallel walls, and inside of those walls were filled with soil for the platform. In Roman times, none of those walls were visible. They were all buried. That's why it's so well preserved. Otherwise, the local people would use them as building material. Well, we are in front of the east gate of Troy 6 and 7, and the city wall started from here. You see later Roman wall just cutting the earlier wall through. But when you concentrate yourself on Troy 6, you mustn't see this. It started from here, and after surrounding whole citadel, ended there, just like a spiral. So in between overlapping walls, you see the corridor. So the outer wall turns sharply inward, forms another gap. As soon as you turn left, you're going to see two foundations. In the middle, there was a wooden door, not visible from outside, not possible to destroy by using a battering ram, because there's no room for a battering ram here. And this defense system we see only here at Troy. Because of that, historians say Trojans were indigenous people of Anatolia. But what sort of people they were, we have no idea. Discussions are going on. We call them the Trojans. Some archaeologists say they were Greek-speaking people. Others say they spoke Luvian. Hittites, who established a big empire in central Anatolia around 15th century, 16th century BC, spoke Luvian. So probably those Trojans were the same, they used the same sort of language. Homer says the Trojans and their allies spoke many different languages, and I think this is logical, because when you look at the map of Turkey, it's like a bridge in between two continents, and over that bridge many people came from both sides and mixed with each other. The Greeks arrived after 13th century BC, after the Trojan War. Then Phrygians, Persians, Alexander the Great, Romans, and last of all the Turks came from Central Asia. Today in Central Asia there are many Turkish-speaking people, but we Anatolian Turks don't look like them anymore because we are a little bit Trojan, Greek, Roman, Turkish, like a mosaic or like a mixed salad.
We're standing, Mustafa and I are standing here on the platform which was the Temple of Athena, and we're looking out to the plain towards the Aegean and the end of the Gallipoli Peninsula, where you can see the monuments where the Dardanelles enters the Aegean Sea. This was originally part of the city, and I understand, Mustafa, this was actually about 2 meters higher than it is now when the Greeks actually leveled the city, or the Romans leveled the city.
Actually, they were the most important buildings of Troy 6 and 7 here, but for obtaining the platform for the Temple of Athena, they leveled this part, so the central part of the Acropolis was destroyed at that time.
Right. So, and we understand Schliemann in his excavations actually destroyed part of the platform over here.
Yeah, he was after the city of Priam. I mean, he didn't care about the Roman ruins because he read the Iliad when he was a child. While everybody was thinking Troy was just a legend, he believed the existence of Troy. He wanted to find it, so that's why he dug down a little bit more and he found some other foundations from different times, and he thought the bottom was the city of Priam. That's why he dug that big trench right in the middle.
Ah, right. So this taught us a very valuable lesson, didn't it? That behind the legends, or what was assumed to be legends, were actual historical facts, and by following what everyone else wrote off as legends, he actually discovered Troy right on the knocker under the ancient Mount of Hisarlik.
I believe every legend based on some reality.
Yes, well, Mustafa and I will discuss some of the legends relating to Troy, which has quite significant implications for the nations of Western Europe. But we'd like to talk first about some of the topography. Now, tell us about the topography here, and also given our discussions on the fact that the sea levels 2,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago may have been 2 meters higher, and its implications for ancient Troy.
Actually, according to the descriptions in the Iliad, there were two rivers, Simois and Scamander, and both of them still run. And the one on this side, River Scamander, still keeps the same name, Menderes, Meander, Scamander is the same thing. So also Homer says Troy was over a steep, windy hill. Steep and windy. So with these descriptions, Schliemann came just with the Iliad in his hand. He started to dig from here. I mean, the two rivers joining spot where the green trees are, you know. And that was
those green trees, the copse of trees right in the center of the plain.
So that means during the time of the Trojan War, the sea was not closer than those trees there. But it was probably closer. But if we talk about the early times, like Troy 1, the whole area was underwater.
So what we've got is that at Troy 1, the whole of this plain was underwater, and the topography was such that the sea began to recede, and that by the time of the Iliad, the junction of the rivers was probably some form of delta, which was underwater, marshy and swampy, because I understand Mustafa, the Romans had a lot of malarial problems, and that was one of the reasons they left Troy.
Yeah, I mean the sea level was, in the early times, the sea level was 1 meter or 2 meter higher than today. But even recently it was swampy. I mean, when the two rivers flooded, even I remember when I was a child, the whole area was under the water, floods, and there was a malarial area. Actually, there is a connection between the legend of Rome and the legend of Troy. Many Roman emperors believed that they were coming from a Trojan family, like Julius Caesar, Julius, Ilos is another name for son of Aeneas. You know?
Yes,
so they were coming from a Trojan family.
They all saw themselves as descendants of the Trojans.
Exactly, and that's why Julius Caesar wanted to make Troy the capital of the great Roman Empire. In some books it says that Julius Caesar was killed by Brutus because of that policy, and his successor Augustus was also born. But Constantine came to build Constantinople here, but
Yes, this is a most important point that we've posed the questions. Constantine, having been declared Dux Britannicum, declared emperor at York in 309, then packs up and goes to the other end of the empire to establish a major city and built Constantinople. And originally you're saying it was here that he was going to build.
Nothing is certain in archaeology, but in some books it says that he came here to build Constantinople, but when he came here it was a malarial area, so it was swampy, then he didn't like, then he moved to Istanbul, it was called Byzantion at the time, seeing the magnificent location of Byzantion, he decided, to build Constantinople there.
I think that the reason he wanted to build it here originally was because he also saw himself as a Trojan coming from British stock, who saw themselves as Trojans in the same way the Cornish and the Welsh are descended from, or see themselves today as descendants of the Trojans.
So you're talking about Geoffrey of Monmouth?
Yes, histories of Nennius, Geoffrey of Monmouth and Milton, they're very important histories.
I've heard about that too. I mean, as far as I know, Brutus was one of the followers of Aeneas. While Aeneas was going to Italy, Brutus left him and went to England.
Yes, via North Africa.
I don't know.
So the histories say that he went to North Africa and then joined up with the Cornishmen, those who became the Cornishmen after along the coast of North Africa towards Carthage, and that they then moved via Spain, the Gadelians, who are now the Basques, across into Britain and established Britain.
So you know better than me.
Oh, well, I've looked at the histories, and I think I think you're right. But there's a grain of truth behind a lot of these things, and we're going to now examine all of those histories and just see just where this all takes us and what's happening. What I did in talking with my good friend Alexandria from Ephesus about the port there, I had mentioned last time I was here that the Australians had done work, and we have demonstrated that the sea levels from 1,000 years onwards, in the last 1,000 to 1,500 years, was actually 7 foot or over 2 meters above what it is now. Now, when I posed the question to Achan at Ephesus, where would that sea level place the port? He said right back here at the port of Ephesus. So it may be, it looks as though it's a worldwide drop in water, which would bring this up quite significantly to what we're talking about. And I think we've got to look at what now the topography would be if it was 2 meters higher, and perhaps we might go on to the next section and look at the topography over in the islands and where they might have come and attacked the city. Thank you, Mustafa. Well, Mustafa, we're here now looking at what you've described as the beginnings of first city walls. Could you tell us about that in Troy 1?
Well, actually, this is the city wall of Troy 1. You see it sloping, and this just that part was a tower. You see, made of unworked stones, because this is early Bronze Age. They did not have iron tools to cut the stones. But it is important because it's the first city wall in Anatolia. Actually, urbanization started much earlier. There are much older settlements, but without city wall. First city wall was built here. Why? Of course, because of the strategical location of Troy at the beginning of the line.
Yes, yes. It's extremely important with the Aegean.
And I believe many Trojan wars took place here. And Gallipoli campaign on 1915 was another sort of Trojan war, you know.
Fought by the Trojans trying to take it back.
Yeah, I mean, the Allies, Australians, New Zealanders, fought for the Dardanelles. But the legendary Trojan War took place because of a beautiful woman. What do you think about it? Would you fight for a beautiful woman for 10 years?
Well, if you're married and one is hesitant to say no, but it defies reason that the Greek nation would go to war for 10 years over a woman. There has to be powerful strategic processes at work, and you can see the battles, and perhaps we can talk about the implications of what's happening in the rest of the world, and later on we can discuss things like the Periset and the rise of Israel and things like that, because we've got the location of the battles of Troy and the Trojan War is important. One school says it's Troy 6, ends 1250. Another school says 12:7, ends 10:25. Now it makes much more sense to me to end in 1025, given the rest of the history of what's going on in the Middle East and the Aegean. That 1025 makes much more sense to me and fits in with all the things that are happening, and the mercenaries of the Hittites. The Hittites became mercenaries after 1025, and they're all recorded as propping up in Israel and joining the Israelites. Now, something must have happened to the Hittites to force them into that position.
Well, there are new discussions nowadays, like the chief archaeologist, for instance, Manfred Kaufmann, says that the Trojans were the same people as the Hittites.
Yes,
you know?
I believe that that's true,
Yeah.
and I believe the Iliad calls them the Keltoi. Now, how much more evidence do you need that they were Celts? And if they call them Celts, and you've got the Hittites are called the Hatti and Kalti, that seem to be descended from the earlier Hatti civilizations. You've got the origins of the Celts being then brought out in the open, and we can discuss with much more power the things that are happening in both the Bible and in ancient history.
Well, we call the Celts in Anatolia Galatians or Gauls. Even Galata Tower in Istanbul
Yes.
was built by them. It's an historical fact.
Yes,
And
yes.
they were the greatest enemies of the people of Pergamon.
And they
later.
keep coming back here, like the Cimmerians came back and occupied this area. Now the Welsh to this day call themselves the Cymry people. I mean, these historical facts are there, staring the archaeologists in the face. It seems as though sometimes we've got to hit them over the head with a mallet to get them to look at things staring them in the face.
Amazing. A few years ago, not a few years ago, when the new excavation started here, there was an article on the local newspaper saying that Europeans are seeking for their roots at Troy. So
Yes,
many
they're
European
here,
nations
yes.
believe that they were originated
Yes,
from Troy,
yes.
you know.
Yes, the British histories were full of it, and they've been written off as legends, when in fact the reality is that this is their roots. This is the roots of the Celtic people here, and I will talk later about the Parthians and the Anglo-Saxons, who also came from the Middle East, and they were allied and related to the Hittites. Now I think all those things we can discuss. Now there's another point I'd like to digress on. We mentioned earlier in our discussions, which we haven't captured on camera, that there was a horse tooth found in Troy 3 in the levels. Now that's quite early, and you said that caused quite a bombshell in the world in relation to the harnessing of horses and the use of horses in domestication.
Well, we know the Troy 6 and 7 people used war chariots. They were horse breeding people, like in
Yes,
the Iliad.
mentions that.
Iliad mentions about Hector as tamer of horses, you
Yes.
know, and the Hittites were using horse
Yes.
power also. But Troy 3 is a bit early for this. At that time, using horsepower is equal to atom bomb. That's what they say.
Yes,
Yeah.
a radical. Well, it looks as though we may very well have found the earliest domestication of horses for civil and military purposes here in Troy, and that would fit with what we understand of the Celts and their use of harnessed horses. And in fact, the colonization of India by the Aryans in about 1000 BC was done with harnessed horses and using Iron Age implements, which the Hittites also had developed. They developed the manufacture of iron, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They did. Yes.
Yes. We mentioned bronze here. Where would iron have come in the shaping of Troy?
Well, the end of Troy 6 period is beginning of Iron period, before the Bronze Age, you know.
Good, yeah.
So the time of the Trojan War, by the end of the time Trojan War, it was roughly time of beginning of
The
Iron Age.
right. Okay, so
Which
we've
is
got
13th century BC or
the Trojan War was fought in the Iron Age, and that puts us right fair and
beginning
square
of
into,
yes.
yeah, that puts us into the late judges, early kingships of Israel. Yeah, that's very important. Now, perhaps we might go on now and look at some of the other
Yes,
areas.
yes,
Thank you. Mustafa, we're here in front of Schliemann Trench. You might tell us some of the significance about Schliemann and then also Troy 1 and 2 and the relationship to the sea.
Actually, he believed the bottom was the city of Priam. That's why he made deeper trenches, and he found those foundations down there, 5,000 years of walls. And the present archaeological team also started working from that section, and they found fishing hook of copper. Skeleton of a big tuna fish was found from that direction. but more fish ponds in between the ruins of Troy 1 and 2. Means fishing was an important occupation.
Industry, yes.
Because the sea was coming all the way here and Troy 1 was right by the seaside.
So the real importance is Troy 1 was a seaport when the sea levels were up almost to the walls of Troy.
Exactly. And the sea level was higher and the sea receded because the climate became colder, pools started falling ice, and then also those two rivers silted the plain. Because of the two rivers, now you see a fertile plain here. I mean, Troy at the beginning was the seaport, then it became a fertile plain. Then international trade started. You see the Dardanelles there.
Yes.
Troy has been always a good spot for building cities.
Yes. Yes, you can see its strategic importance is significant. The Black Sea comes through the Bosporus, the Dardanelles, and just where the Dardanelles reach the Aegean, you've got this major ancient city, which obviously was a major metropolis
And
at this time.
the discussion, I mean, archaeologist Manfred Kaufmann says this was the metropole of the area, but there are some discussions between the professors at the same university. One of them, Mr. Colt, for instance, says that, come on, you're exaggerating. That was only a pirate nest here.
A pirate nest.
Pirate nest. They were just robbing the passersby.
Well, some pirate nest. This is a major city. You can see its strategic importance. Perhaps given this, unfortunately, Schliemann had to dig. As you said, you dig and you've got to destroy something, and there was a bit destroyed with this. The second excavations are much more professional. But let's have a look now at the Western Gate, and let's look at the topography from there and the actual attacks that probably came on the city.
Let's do that.
Thank you. Now we're standing on the ramp at Troy 6 and 7. Next to us are what most of us pointed out are the two houses, the larger Troy 6 house and the smaller Troy 7 house, which indicates that there was a later influx on Troy 7, perhaps with lesser building capacity.
Well, actually, Troy, if there are so many small houses everywhere inside of the city walls, that we explained with a siege, with a war. And we spoke about this. So that's an example there. But the larger ones were from Troy 6, and it fits better with the descriptions in the Iliad, they say, because it was a mighty city according to the descriptions in the Iliad.
Right. So what we're saying also in our discussions is that perhaps it might be better described as Troy 6 and Troy 6A rather than 6 and 7, in that it's a large city with then under siege with more various speaking peoples coming in with different languages and building siege dwellings within the city.
For example, if I were an archaeologist, I would say 6A, 6B, before the war, after the war. I would say Troy 6 was the city of Priam, and the war started, and the new people came inside and built small houses, and everywhere, wherever they found an empty place, they built small houses everywhere. So actually, archaeologists are examining even the smallest details. Like when we speak about 9 cities, I mean 9 major layers, but if you go in archaeological details, altogether there were 4 to 6 building phases. But that's a bit too much, it's too confusing.
Too confusing, yes. But as a soldier, one can see the necessity of building and recruiting mercenary forces or other forces to help you in a 10-year war, and that the soldiers coming in with their wives would seek shelter firstly in the city and then build these smaller dwellings to house their people in emergency accommodation.
Yeah.
So you've still got the same city, still under a 10-year siege, and then this Troy 7 is actually this period of the siege and the war, which makes much more sense when we're dealing with this history, and it condenses the history a bit and brings it much closer to other events that are occurring. Now, one of the important things that Mustafa has pointed out is this behind us, the Western Gate, which was later filled in. Would you like to explain that, Mustafa, while we're turning and getting some shots of the Western Gate?
Actually, if we compare the workmanship of the middle part of this, I mean that wall and that wall, you can see the difference. Larger blocks from Troy 6 city wall, smaller ones filled in later on. It was built later on, I don't know. But in the Iliad, there are some descriptions. According to the Iliad, the duel between Achilles and Hector took place outside of the West Gate, which was called probably Skyen Gate, Skyen Gate,
Yes.
whatever you pronounce it, So that means that the duel between Achilles and Hector took place out there, down there in the
here.
field. You see the cotton field there.
Now you mentioned the cave where they did the washing and the...
Yeah, the cave is just on the left side of that green field, which was also mentioned in the where the Trojan ladies washed their clothes. That cave was excavated, but once I think there was a natural spring during the time of the Trojan War.
So what we've got is, in fact, Homer's descriptions in the 9th century are actually spot on. They've been duplicated by archaeological finds exactly where he said they would be. I think that's a very important lesson where everyone sort of wrote Homer off as a legend, and we found that in fact it essentially was a very accurate history of what went on.
Also the island of Tenedos, you see further away, for instance. That
Yes,
was
right
also,
through the saddles.
and it was mentioned in the Iliad also.
Yes, they hid their ships behind the island when they came into attack. Didn't they?
I'll correct one thing, not in the Iliad, but later in Aeneas, because when we speak about the Trojan horse, we don't hear anything about the wooden horse in the Iliad, but
No.
in the Odyssey and in the Aeneid, Virgilius wrote later Aeneas, so that was mentioned in Odysseus, or
Yeah.
Odyssey, or in Virgil, in
Yes,
Aeneid.
yes, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That
Also, you can see the two rivers. The overbed of Scamander, the first line of the trees, and the further away is the new line, Scamander River.
the new Scamander. So
Yeah.
the Scamander is here and then right across. That's important because which Scamander were we talking about? This one, if this one is there, then the water is much further up and it's perhaps way back towards the saddle as well. And this peninsula may have just had a very narrow neck.
Yes, and now present archaeologists believe that they landed from that part, the Ship Bay Harbour, not from the Dardanelles, not from Hellespont.
Right.
But Homer says they came from Hellespont. I mean, whether from here or from there, I think both makes sense. I think,
Either way would make sense.
Yeah, because if it was a big army, I think they came from everywhere.
Probably, yes.
But the amazing thing that the river still keeps the same name. Menderes in Turkish means meander, Scamander.
Yes,
Can you imagine
yes,
that?
Yes, very, very interesting that these historical areas, this places have been such important and consistent historical use. Yes, I think we've covered this period, and most of us have been most helpful in dealing with the details of Troy. It's certainly well worth seeing, and I think that there are a lot of implications for what we can now talk about. I think the implications for anyone studying the Bible are very, very important, because if the city was destroyed in 1025 and that Troy 7 is actually condensed to Troy 6 and 1025 is the Trojan War, we've got an entirely new scenario, and all the things in the Bible start to make sense. In 1025 we're looking at Saul's reign. Eli is just dead, and one of the points that would indicate that we are looking at this period is that in Nennius's history he says, and in the Abbey McGeegan's history of Ireland, they say that these things happened when Eli was judge in Israel. Now, Eli was the last judge in Israel, and he fell and broke his neck because he was overweight on hearing of the death of his sons. Saul was then made king. David slew Goliath and was made a champion in the army of the Lord, in the army of Israel, and he assumed rulership in 1013 when Saul was removed. Saul was killed, and David then ruled for 7 years at Hebron. Now that's most important. The Psalms are talking about David's talking in the Psalms about moving against Meshach and Tubal. He's in the tents of Kedar, which means that he's way up in the north, going up into the Crimea. He's talking to Israel where he says, your father was a Hittite and your mother was an Amorite. Now, the only reason that the Hittites would be literally joined with Israel is if their main fortress, which was here at Troy, was destroyed. Now, if they were destroyed, they moved then into the pay of Israel as mercenaries. Uriah was a Hittite. Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, was the wife of Uriah the Hittite. These things have enormous implications for the history of Israel, and Israel emerges as a major world power, not because of things isolated to Israel, but because Troy was destroyed by the Greeks, and that left a vacuum in which Israel could then emerge as a world power. And I think we have to look at that in relation to revised histories of Egypt and a revised history on the fall of Troy, that we located to the 7th era, or 6A, which comes to 1025 during the reign of Saul of Israel. And I think that that is the next step of our investigations.
We're now at the current excavation site of Alexandria, Troas. Alexandria, Troas is not very popular among the archaeologists in this site because the visible ruins are rather limited. But we know this is one of the largest sites of the time. Alexander the Great, after he came and conquered Asia Minor and finished his mission in Persia at the age of 33, the huge empire was divided among the generals, and one of his generals called Antigones, and all others as well. Some used the name of Alexander, some on their own, or to the names of the members of their family, started to build cities. In this respect, this city was set up by Antigones and his family as a very important commercial center on the way between north and south. And city developed, became very prosperous, but later on, when he get aged at late 80s, this went into the hands of Lysimachus, the famous commander of Alexander, and together with the Lysimachus idea, the names have been changed to Troy, or rather Alexander Troas. And same continuity went throughout all the ages of early Christianity. We do know that fact. And towards the end of 4th century, when we find Christianity is very popular, when we find Eastern Roman Empire is looking for a new center to settle down, this place was thought by the Roman emperors to be the capital of Eastern Roman Empire. This is all happening before Constantinople was thought to be the new city because of its glory, the setting, and of course all around the setting and fertility of the lands. But they changed their mind. The city still went on to be used by the merchants of the time, but gradually, years passed by, city lost its importance together with the rest of the cities in Asia Minor, same and all throughout the ages. Throughout the excavations, scholars found out that much of the wealth is surprisingly came from Athens by a very well-known rich man, the philosopher, the artist, the business person called Herodes Atticus. His name is everywhere around, even at the entrance to the area you can see this. Germans are working on the project. This is a very interesting circular entrance. They call this Eastern Gate, going towards and going all the way down to the beautiful Aegean Sea. We know that Aegean has a special meaning here because throughout the 2nd century, throughout the early 1st century, Paul came here twice in his missionary journeys. He came, and the first time he met a lot of people, and he stayed here, he made friends, and in his vision he was told that he should be going to other side of the Aegean Sea. This was the first invitation for him to go to Macedonia, and actually he made this trip. He went to Kavala and Philippi with his friend Timothy, and on his way back he made this way again. He went through this city and made friends and left. That's why the way he was mentioned in the Bible, this must have been an important church centers of the time. Today, together with the new project, we're hoping that in probably 10 years' time, we will find almost the same size as Ephesus, an unbelievably large city.